the Dropa Stones, are used as examples to back up the ancient astronaut theory. But the question is, are they truly of alien origin, or is there a more down-to-earth explanation? The Dropa Stones have been mentioned in numerous publications, specifically in the ancient astronaut sphere, a story repeated many times. The story goes like this. In January 1937, a Chinese archaeologist named Chu Pu Te discovered something extraordinary while exploring a series of caves in the Himalayas mountains at the isolated Beiyan Karaula in Qinghai, on the borders of China and Tibet. The caves are claimed to be a system of artificially carved tunnels. The walls were said to be square in shape and had a glossy layer, almost as if the walls were carved using intense heat. Somewhere in the caves, a group of tombs were found in rows. The tombs were 4.3 feet or 1.3 meters in length. The skeletons found inside the tombs had large heads with small weak-looking bodies. The graves bared no inscriptions, but it is said that hundreds of 1-foot wide stone discs were found, known as the Dropa Stones. The stone discs were said to have a hole in the center of each stone. The hole was supposedly 3/4 of an inch wide. On the cave walls, it was claimed to have carved pictures of the sunrise, the moon, and the stars, with the dots connecting the Earth to the observable universe. The cave paintings are said to have been dated to around 12,000 years old, but there is no evidence that can prove this dating took place. The artifacts recovered by the expedition were stored at Beijing University for 20 years. While they were there, it is said there were attempts to translate the discs, which didn't go so well. Around 1958, the discs were examined by Dr. Tsum Nui of Beijing. He supposedly cracked the code of the discs and unraveled a story involving a crash landing of a group of outer space creatures called the Dropa. It is said that most of the Dropa survivors were killed off by a local people. The Dropa came down from the clouds in their aircraft, our men, women, and children hid in the caves 10 times before sunrise. When at last they understood the language of the Dropas, they realized that the newcomers had peaceful intentions. It's interesting, there are plenty of lost languages that are almost impossible to decipher, because the language is uniquely based on the way the lost people interpreted the world. Yet an unknown language, not of this world, can be translated by one man within 20 years. The man known as Tsum Nui is mentioned again, as he supposedly was in a professional journal in 1962. Sometime after, he was mocked and went to Japan, where he died. His writings were never officially published, and most importantly, it seems there is no evidence of Tsum ever existing before the Dropa claims. In 1974, a man by the name of Ernst Wagner, or Wigner by some accounts of the story, was a supposed Austrian engineer. He is said to have located 2 of the Dropa discs when he was on a tour in the Banpo Museum in Xi'an. Wagner claimed to have seen hieroglyphs on the discs, but were heavily worn. When he tried to extract more information about the discs from the museum manager, the manager knew nothing about the 2 objects. Wagner was allowed to take a picture of the discs, and this is the picture that is credited to Wagner. A couple of days later, after Wagner's visit, the Dropa Stones mysteriously disappeared along with the museum manager. This was not according to Wagner, but Professor Wang Zhaijun, the director of the museum in 1994. To put that in perspective, that is 20 years after Wagner's supposed visit. Well, that sums up the story of the Dropa Stones. As you can probably imagine, this supposed true story faced a lot of criticism. There is no evidence that Chu Pu Te ever existed, and there is no proof a 1937 expedition took place. Tsum Nui, the man that is credited with deciphering the Dropa language, doesn't exist, as there is no records of him before the Dropa claims. Dropa believers claim the reason for this is because it was a Chinese communist cover-up. But this theory doesn't hold up, which Tsum was claimed to have fled China and died in Japan in the 1960s. When looking at the sources for the story, it starts to paint a clearer picture. The earliest source that can be found regarding the Dropa Stones comes from an article called La Chirina Gesta, February 9th, 1960. The article talks about aliens coming to Earth and leaving evidence of their existence. The article was later reprinted as Hypothesis, Assumptions, and Guesses. Does the Trail Lead into Space? By Valentin Isakovich Rich and Mikhail Bersovichenko. in the magazine Current Digests of the Russian Press, a Russian-American newspaper published in the United States as early as 1910. It was published on March 30th, 1960. Some have suggested that Rich and Chernenko never existed, but they did publish a book in 1964 entitled Through the Magic Crystal, A Story of Ideas, The Hunt for the Elements in 1982, and In Search of Elements in 1985. So it is possible the names are just aliases. In 1962, a German vegetarian magazine published a story by Reinhard Wiedemann called UFOs in Ancient Times, the Hieroglyphs of Benya Caligula. The story is credited to a news agency under the acronym DINA, Tokyo. But the problem is, there is no evidence the news agency ever existed. 2 years later, the same story was printed in a German UFO magazine in July 1964. The article was under the same agency, DINA, by the same Reinhard Wiedemann. Again, an occurring theme to the story. There is no proof Wiedemann ever existed. Through the French translation by Bufo, a Belgian UFO organization, in 1965, and the following Russian translation, which was summarized by Vyacheslav Zanesev in the magazine Sputnik, the Russian Digest in 1967, made the story blow up, reaching the upcoming UFO theorist Erich von Däniken. So what can we make of this? The story originated from a theory that aliens visited the distant past by two science writers, possibly using the aliases Rich and Chernenko. Then the story was stretched out by an unknown writer that published in a German vegetarian magazine. The story didn't get the attention the hoaxer wanted, so it was published in 1964, a better year for UFO stories. But the hoaxer made a huge mistake. The story was rewritten, describing the expedition where Chupute found the stone discs 25 years before. Since the hoaxer pushed the story up by 2 years for more attention, the hoaxer forgot the original claim of the expedition was in 1937, not 1939. As for what was the inspiration for the story, it turns out that the Dropa were not aliens. They were a native people of the eastern Tibetan plateau, called the Dropka, which means solitude or inhabitant of high pastured lands. For the Dropa Stones themselves, they may have been inspired by the Chinese Baidiscs. The earliest Baidiscs are from the Neolithic period, from 5000 to 2000 BC, and later examples can be found in the Shang and Zhou dynasties, from 1700 to 255 BC. The Baidiscs are still up for interpretation, but most believe they are a symbol of heaven or the sun. They have been found in the mouths of dead people to be used in funeral rites, and were also thought to protect the owner from evil. The Baidisc was later restored in the Ming and Qing dynasties. If there had to be anything to learn from this fictional tale, is that anyone can claim anything, but if there is nothing to back it up, it can be debunked as fiction. It is stories like this that muddy the water when it comes to learning history and ties down real artifacts, such as the Chinese Baidiscs, to a hoax. But all is not lost, as long as people can have a skeptical mind when looking at these objects. A logical explanation can usually be found. Thanks for watching. I know this topic was on the bizarre end of the spectrum, so let me know if you guys like these sort of videos. Anyways, if you like the content, make sure to leave a like. It really helps me out. If you want to keep up to date on what is going on for future content or updates, follow me on Twitter. I try to post as often as I can. If you haven't already, subscribe for more history content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.